Hello and welcome to this video and to March's book review. It went better than expected, my reading. Obviously it was our first full month as parents. I had to work out a routine around a newborn baby, but I still have 5 books to talk to you about, partly because 2 of them are very short because I'm still doing that whole reread thing, but we'll get into that. If you saw last month's video, then you will know that I started the Caraval series. So the first book I finished in March, I did kind of start it in February, but finished in March, was Legendary by Garber. This is the second book in that series, and in this one we are following Tella, who is the sister of Scarlet, who is our lead in the first one. So it's Tella this time going into the Caraval game. It's like a magic game, and this one's happening in the capital for the Empress, I think she is, birthday, and there's a whole heap of stuff that goes on with that. I have to say I didn't like it as much as the first one. I really enjoyed the first one. I thought the whole magical game thing of it and finding the clues was really good. But this one, although we were still in that setting, didn't have that element really to it. Because although Tella was doing Caraval and she wanted to win it, those were not really the clues she was following. She was kind of on her own mission, I guess, compared to the one before. Apologies if this is a bit cutty. I've got a bit of a sore throat, a bit of a tickly throat, so I keep coughing and I'm sort of cutting those out, which is also why my eyes have gone watery and my nose has gone red. But there we go. I didn't like Tella as much as a character, so reading from her perspective it was a bit boring, I guess. I had quite a lot of extended blinks while reading this book, but I don't know whether that's because of the book or the fact that I was in the depths of newborn. Like, she was literally like a few weeks old as I finished this one, so I wasn't as keen on it. And where they took the story, I found it a bit, I wasn't sure how they were going to then tie everything together at the end. I wasn't sure how we were going to try and interweave that actual Caraval game, which ish. They introduced this thing called fates, so we were learning a lot about that, so there was a bit more introduction to the world and stuff. So yeah, not my favourite of the series, but there were a couple of twists that I didn't see coming, so pluses and minuses to it. So that's Legendary by Garber. I was then going to move straight on to Finale because the Kindle book that I had was just one big thing with the 3 books in it, but I decided I needed a bit of a palette cleanser, so I continue with my like reread project, which is not really a reread project, but I'm essentially working my way through the shelves and reading books that I haven't read for a very long time, since I was like a kid. So the one that I read next was The Cat Mummy by Jacqueline Wilson. This one was never really my favourite as a kid, but it is the one that is signed to me, so I'm not going to be getting rid of it because of that reason, but actually it was better than I remembered. And part of the reason I'm rereading this kind of stuff is to see whether I want to keep them, because space is limited, but also if I am going to keep them, are they ones that I think that Eloise would want to read eventually? Yeah, potentially. And I've decided that actually this one is. In this we are following Verity, who, as in all Jacqueline Wilson books, has gone through some trauma. So her mum has passed away in this, and she has a cat called Mabel. They're learning about the Egyptians, that cat dies, link the 2 things together. I thought it was actually quite a good look at grief and death and how other people react to it, and how other people's reactions can affect you and all of that kind of stuff, and I thought it was well written for the audience that it's for. It is also a good book for like bond with pets and stuff like that. A lot of this is about also her friends and their pets, and obviously we have Jeff and we are hoping very much that him and Eloise are going to be friends, so that again is a good aspect of this book. Again, it also looks at the Egyptians, so there's a bit of learning in that, and if she ever does it at school, this might be a good book to wheel out for that one. I remember studying them in primary school, potentially around the time that this came out. So there's a few things there that I think will be good for her if she ever wants to read it. She may decide not to. So this is a children's book. It is aimed at younger readers, but there were some words thrown in that, you know, even I was like, I'm not entirely sure what that means. So although it's written quite simplistic, there are words in it that would need explaining, which I didn't really get that kind of choice, I guess, from Jacqueline Wilson. But that doesn't take away from the story, it doesn't take away from the fact that my copy is signed, and I remember going with my dad and queuing up at Waterstones to get it done so after school. So although it's not my favourite Jacqueline Wilson book, although currently I've only read 3, I've read a lot more but that I remember, but it's not my favourite one so far, but I do think it's worth keeping and good, and obviously, as I said, my version signed, so that was my palette cleanser in between the 2 Caraval books, which means that the next book I read was Finale by Stephanie Garber, which is the 3rd and final book in that Caraval series. This one doesn't actually follow a game, which I think is my main criticism of it, because that's the part I really liked from the first book, and then the second and the third barely have it in it, and that's not ideal. But we are following both Tella and Scarlett in this. We get chapters from both their perspectives as the series comes to a conclusion, which is the only way I can talk about it without giving any spoilers. It did take me a long time, although the writing is consistent throughout the 3 books. It is well written for what it is. It did take me a long time. Again, that may be because I have a newborn baby, but I didn't actually connect very well with the characters, so even when I did have a spare moment where I could have picked up a book when she was sleeping or something, I didn't. I chose to just waste my time scrolling on my phone instead, which is not ideal. As I said, I did miss the sort of magical elements of it. It is there, but not in a way that I particularly enjoyed. But the ending did bring in that a bit more, and that did pique my interest a bit more as we got towards the end of the book. Like really the very end of the book was when I was really into it, and I read it much quicker. I think my issue with this series is that I never really got on with any of the characters. I quite liked Scarlett in the first book, but the way her character arc goes, and it is a good character arc for story purposes, but it did mean that I wasn't really a fan of her, and then Tella I was never particularly keen on reading from her perspective anyway, so it was more difficult, I guess, for me to get into it and to enjoy it as much as perhaps I would have wanted. But I did like the fact that this one was dual perspective. I did find in the second book that we blacked Scarlett's opinion a little bit, particularly as we got to know her in the first book and then she disappears essentially in the second book. But I did find that there was a lot of stuff in this one that there didn't seem to be a need for it to be in there. It felt particularly fillery. It didn't seem to move the story on very much. So again, all of that probably coincided to it not being my favourite. Caraval, the first one, is definitely my favourite and definitely worth a read. I'm glad I finished the series because it would have irritated me if I hadn't, but I wouldn't say the second and third books are ones that I would rush to read again, and part of me is not sure whether I'm glad I've read them or not. But then my whole reading experience of the whole trilogy is probably marred a lot by the circumstance that I'm in. So give it a go. It's definitely a fan favourite. There's a lot of people that love it. I might just be in the minority. It might just be my circumstance. I don't know. But certainly I found the series, as we went on, got less and less interesting for me. Except for the end of the last book. It did draw things together and it did do it in an interesting way. So maybe you do need to read the other bits so that you know what's going on for that, but there we go. That's Finale by Stephanie Garber and the end of that series. Next is a big hunky chunky non-fiction. So I read Baby Wisdom by Deborah Jackson. I actually started this in January and have just been reading it slowly. I decided as we were getting towards the end of the month and I didn't have that much left of this to read, that I was just going to get it done and get it off my bedside table essentially. But this is looking at different aspects of the first year of parenting and how different cultures and communities do it. Essentially the message in this is do what works for you, because you can look anywhere in the world and everyone's doing something different. So just because your country's saying one thing does not mean it's the right thing. You do what works for you and your baby. I was very interested in this. I thought I was going to get a lot of stuff from it, just about different cultures and things like that. It wasn't necessarily I was going to learn about parenting, but more just an idea of how it's done around the world. And it was interesting as I was reading it, but I have to say that nothing from this book has actually stuck with me. I wouldn't be able to tell you any facts from it, and I do feel with a non-fiction you should be able to remember some of what you've read, and I don't with this one, unfortunately. Despite its size, it is quite easy to read. It's also very easy to read in small chunks, so when I was off work but still pregnant, so January essentially, I would read about 15-20 pages of this in the morning while Pete got ready to go to work, and then when he left I got ready and stuff. But I would lay in bed and read this, and it was very easy to do so in those small chunks. It's split very well for that to happen. The chapters themselves are kind of long, but it's broken down into bite-sized pieces very well, and that's how I read it. Although by the end of March when I decided to pick this up, it was just because I was getting frustrated that I've been reading it for so long, but that's more on me than the book. My one thing about this, when I went into it, I thought it was going to be more places around the world. The flags on these patterned shoes that you can't really see are very, very obvious what countries they are, but we didn't really get anything from those countries. It was more about like small tribes in Africa or in the rainforest in South America and stuff, which although is interesting, I did expect to have a bit more of a comparison than we got. And then anything that was European was from like medieval times. It was very much in history rather than modern. I mean, this book is reasonably old as well at the moment. I think it was 2001, 2002 that it was published. So again, things change, but so was interesting to read. It's not actually as big as it looks because the end part is all like notes and stuff like that. I'm glad to have read it and to have, at least at the time, gone, oh, that's interesting. It's just a shame that nothing's really stayed with me. So that's Baby Wisdom by Deborah Jackson. And then the last book that I read was another Jacqueline Wilson, and this one's Dustbin Baby. Again, part of that reread bit is just what happens to be next on the shelf. This one is following April. April was left in a bin as a baby, so we're following her life essentially as she navigates the care system, adoption, that kind of thing. So this is actually all set on one day, her 14th birthday, as she then looks back at where she's been and the people that have influenced her life and things like that, as she's trying to come to terms with her own identity, I guess. This is probably the first one that I'm going to actually get rid of Jacqueline Wilson. I'm not sure who this is aimed at. This says that it's for older readers, and our main character April is 14 in it, or it's her 14th birthday, but it is written very much like Cat Mummy, which is aimed at like 8-year-olds. So I don't know who it's aimed at. I would have read this as probably a 10-year-old, and I think some of the subject matter in it might be a bit much because there's a lot of trigger warnings in here for you know, abandonment, abuse, suicide, which is quite graphic actually for this kind of book. I think this is probably meant to be aimed at the young end of YA, but I just think it's written too young. Certainly if I was reading this as a 12 to 14-year-old, I would have thought it was a little bit babyish. As I said, I read it about 10, and that's probably the right age group for the writing, just not for the content. So I'm very torn by it. I mean, as an adult, I quite enjoyed it in loose terms because it's not the most pleasant of topics. And as a new mother with a newborn baby, I know I've mentioned it a lot, but it's a big part of my life at the moment. The whole passages about her biological mum giving birth, not that she knew, it was all fiction that she was expecting, and then actually dumping the baby and then someone finding the baby it touched a bit of a nerve, it has to be said. So I'm very torn by it. The other reason why I think I've been sort of swayed into getting rid of it instead of keeping this one is although April has been through a lot, she's not really a character I want Eloise to read from, because she's incredibly ungrateful. As I said, I get that she's been through a lot, but I don't think that means that some of the stuff that she does in this she can. I don't think it's right with the way that she treats her current foster mum and stuff like that. But then she is a 14-year-old girl, so maybe, I don't know. But yeah, so because of the confusion over who it's aimed at, because of the writing and the content, plus the fact that I'm not a big fan of April, is the reason why this is going. But as I said, as an adult reader reading this now, I do think it's actually alright. It's not that bad. It was an easy read, because it always is. There was a lot of topics, as you sort of expect from Jacqueline Wilson, but also I think there's way more in this than I remembered, because I didn't really remember any of the content in this book at all, or compared to some of the others. And I also liked the fact that there were quite a few Easter eggs for other Jacqueline Wilson books in this. So as I said, she's in the care system, so her social worker is Elaine, who's also the one from Tracy Beaker. She also has a chat with Tanya, who is in Bad Girls, so there's a lot of Easter eggs for other Jacqueline Wilson books in it, which I did enjoy, and it took me a little while because it's been a little while since I've read these books, but I got there. There may have been more that I've completely bypassed me because I don't remember the content of the books, like this one. So yeah, that's the last book that I read in March, and that was Dustbin Baby by Jacqueline Wilson. I am hoping to get a bit more read. I'm trying to be a bit more, put a few better habits in place. Certainly when I'm feeding Eloise overnight in the early hours of the morning, instead of just like doom scrolling, I want to be reading my book. I did that this morning, worked well, so I'm hoping to maintain that, which may mean I read a bit more. If I can maintain the sort of 5 books a month, that seems to be pretty manageable and doable, but you never know. And certainly if I stick with rereading, they're all quite short. Or at least they were. They may not be when I have a look at my shelf soon. I need to go and have another cough and drink some water, so I'm going to finish this video here. So if you've enjoyed it, please click that like button. If you've got any comments about the books that I've spoken about, or want to recommend or anything like that, put something in the comments below. If you're interested in other videos that are upcoming, click the subscribe button. We have if I've managed to edit these and got them in the order that I think I'm doing, we've got a Easter weekend vlog and my birth story coming up, and I will see you in the next one. Hopefully not with this cough. Bye!